Welcome to part 2 of NFL Curses, a series where we explore the long history of jinxes and hexes plaguing professional football teams and players. If you missed part 1, I'd recommend checking that out before this one, as we'll be ranking the validity of each curse along the way. But with that, let's get slamming. The Super Bowl has several curses attached to it. One of the more notable ones is the home field advantage curse. This curse states that whatever stadium hosts the big game, their home team will not make it to the big game. For a long time, this one seemed quite powerful and unbreakable, as no host team ever made it to the Super Bowl, either missing out on the playoffs or suffering a quick elimination. One notable instance that comes to mind for me is the year of the Minneapolis Miracle, when the Minnesota Vikings were set to host the Super Bowl. But in the NFC Championship game, a week after the historic Miracle play, they got dick-slapped by the Eagles, who they then watched win their first Super Bowl in Minnesota. Now, it was the COVID season that ultimately undid the curse, perhaps because it was during this period that a home game didn't feel like a true home game, with limited fans in attendance. I believe this likely confused the curse, and it was ultimately bested by Brady and the Bucs, who were not only the first home team to host the Super Bowl, but they actually won the bitch, an act that humiliated this once feared curse. It probably helped that it was Tom Brady as well, who was one of the fate weavers of the NFL, able to bend destiny and even curses to his will. Now, the following year, the Los Angeles Rams would pull off the same feat, winning the Super Bowl in their home stadium. Of course, a home game in LA is pretty much an away game, so there is that. But I think the fact that this curse was recently beaten twice proves that it's no longer the threat it once was. While it was a force to be reckoned with in its heyday, today it's not a real curse. The other Super Bowl related curse we'll talk about today is the Super Bowl hangover. There's a few different elements for this one, but essentially the teams that make it to the Super Bowl will not make it back the following year. This affects the winner to some degree, who is not allowed to repeat, and especially the loser, who might not even make it to the playoffs. The physical toll of a longer season, the emotional toll of coming so close to winning it all. There's some very valid, non-supernatural reasons as to why teams don't make it back to the big game. I think just fatigue, loss of momentum, and not to mention players and coaches coming and going easily explain this phenomenon. It can't be understated how hard it is to make the Super Bowl to begin with, and unless you're the Chiefs, who have another fate weaver in Patrick Mahomes, the odds are always against you. And because of all of that, I think the Super Bowl hangover may just be more of a natural occurrence, rather than a malicious curse. For it to be labeled as a curse, there has to be some dark energy, some witchcraft shit going on. It's not a real curse. One of the most famous curses in American sports was the curse of the Billy Goat that prevented the Chicago Cubs from winning the World Series for 71 years. However, a lesser-known curse is said to plague their football counterparts, the Chicago Bears. This is the curse of the Honey Bears. So in 1976, Bears owner, founder, and legend George Halas decided to bring in a cheerleading squad to attend games. He had seen the success other teams like the Cowboys had had with the move, and thought it would be a good way to boost morale after a disappointing 75 season. Director Kathy Core would be brought in to form the Honey Bears, and Halas reportedly said to her that, "As long as I'm alive, we will have dancing girls on the sidelines." The Honey Bears were an instant success, being very popular with fans and the team, and were considered one of the more talented cheerleading squads in the NFL. Halas stayed true to his word, and the Honey Bears remained active until his death in 1983. However, with Halas's passing, ownership passed onto his daughter, Virginia Halas McCaskey, who along with her sons always loathed the Honey Bears. She saw cheerleading as a sexist and degrading thing towards women, even though the actual cheerleaders themselves did not agree with that sentiment. So when she took over, McCaskey wanted to immediately sever ties with the Honey Bears. However, they had a contract that could not be terminated, so they would have to wait until the 85 season when it would expire. Of course, that 1985 Bears season would be one for the ages, with the Bears winning Super Bowl X, capping off what many believe to be the greatest single season from any team in NFL history. Following that historic game, the Chicago Bears and the Honey Bears parted ways. The Honey Bears were a success, and the decision to let them go was a controversial one. The way ownership talked about cheerleading was kind of insulting to Kathy Core and the women there. Even today, the McCaskies, the family that still owns and runs the Bears, remain steadfast in their belief that cheerleading is an unacceptable part of the game. Super Bowl X was the last time the Honey Bears suited up for the Chicago Bears, and since that fateful game, the franchise has seen its share of mediocrity. Since reaching the highest of highs in '85, the Bears have since experienced a lot of lows. They have not won another Super Bowl, they've endured many lackluster seasons, and have failed to find consistent quarterback play, going from a historically dominant franchise to a mediocre one. In the pre-Super Bowl era and up until '85, the Bears were one of the most storied franchises in the NFL, and since then they've been one of the most disappointing. Now, it can be difficult to tell if a team is cursed or if they're just bad. The Bears have been very mismanaged, so the extent to which the Honey Bear curse has impacted Chicago's lack of success isn't that clear. However, I do think that by disrespecting the great George Hollis's wishes to have dancing girls on the sidelines, and by disrespecting the legacy of the squad, I think ownership may have brought bad fortune upon their franchise. This may be an intense case of karma, but it may have been well-deserved. I mean, come on, they were called the Honey Bears. Now here's where it gets kind of eerie. The Honey Bears didn't disband when they were let go of. Instead, they went to cheer for the neighboring Chicago Bulls of the NBA, cheered on by the squad now known as the Lovables. The Chicago Bulls went on to three-peat twice in the 90s, winning 6 championships from 91 to 98. So it appears that there may be an element of good fortune brought to the teams the Honey Bears / Lovables cheer for, particularly under director Kathy Core, who has since retired. With that squad being something of a good luck charm, and witnessing perhaps the greatest Super Bowl winning season in NFL history, and the greatest dynasty in NBA history. I didn't even know about this curse before making this video, but I don't think that this can all be a coincidence. Despite not being that well known outside of Chicago, this is a very real curse, and until ownership either brings back the Honey Bears or issues an apology, the curse will likely remain in effect. Given that it's been almost 40 years, I think this has to be considered a top-tier curse, at least for the time being. Here's a fun one, the big Kirko curse. This is a popular one, and one that's also straightforward. Since he entered the league in 2012, no team that has lost to Kirk Cousins in the regular season has ever gone on to win the Super Bowl that year. Hell, up until this past season, no team has even made it to the Super Bowl, but the 49ers did at least get that far. The list of victims is pretty extensive, and includes many playoff teams, such as the 2022 Bills, the 2018 Eagles, as well as the Packers several times, even the year they were the 1 seed. This one seems to be stronger than people might realize, but a string of victories for a curse doesn't always mean that it is unbreakable. It is until it isn't. Kirk should have a few years left, so enough time for it to be broken, but also enough where it could realistically never be broken before he retires. I think the right team may be able to overcome it, but I wouldn't count on it. I think for now, this one has to be classified as a hard one to break. Damn it, we were this close to not having to watch the Chiefs three-peat. I know a lot of Falcons fans believe their team, and more likely the entire state of Georgia, to be cursed in not only football, but all of sports. Or at least they did, because with Georgia's back-to-back national championships and the Braves' World Series, it's clear the curse of Georgia is over. I don't think the Falcons themselves are cursed either. I think they just do dumb shit. However, I do think their longtime franchise quarterback, Matt Ryan, is most definitely cursed. You could argue Atlanta sacrificed him, transferring the brunt of the curse onto him, and freeing themselves in the process. And I could see that. Throughout his career, Matty Ice was known for his clutch performances and fourth quarter comebacks, even leading the league in that statistic. However, the Falcons always came up short in the playoffs, until that one magical year, where things were never higher, but also never lower. 28-3. Sorry, but we gotta talk about it. Something like that doesn't happen naturally. Now, I love Matt Ryan. I think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, and he played as well as you could hope for most of that game. But unfortunately, that game has left a blemish on an otherwise excellent career. Now, to be fair, at this time, Ryan would have been suffering from the still unbroken MVP curse, as he had won Most Valuable Player that year. And he may have also been dealing with whatever curse Atlanta may have been suffering from. Not to mention they were going up against Tom Brady, who always seems to be involved in shit like this. So perhaps all that combined negative energy resulted in the historic collapse. In any case, in the aftermath of 28-3, it was Matt Ryan who would be the most affected. The MVP curse would be broken, as would the Georgia curse, leaving poor Matty Ice to bear the burden alone. In addition to being the main player whose legacy people tie that collapse to, unfairly in my opinion, what really makes me believe that it is Ryan that is cursed is another game that came a number of seasons later. I'm talking about the Vikings' historic comeback in 2022, the largest comeback in NFL history. This game deserves a video of its own because there's so much football lore here. But to sum things up, Matt Ryan, now quarterbacking for the Colts, got his team up to a 33-0 lead. However, after that, the Vikings unleashed their wrath, scoring 39 points to complete the comeback and win 39-36. Minnesota was, of course, quarterbacked by Kirk Cousins, who we just mentioned is a quarterback with the power to curse others. The thing is that Matt Ryan didn't even play that poorly in this game. I think Ryan has a strong case of being the unluckiest player in NFL history. He's up there at least, and he has since retired, never really recovering his legacy and never hoisting the Lombardi. And as such, I think the curse has, unfortunately, won. I'd love to see the Iceman win one in some capacity, maybe as a coach, but until that day, I think the football gods despise him. Another player that I always felt might be cursed is Wes Welker, who always seems to draw the short end of the stick in the Super Bowl. Welker played in 3 Super Bowls and coached in another one, but has lost each time. He's 0-4. To make matters worse, in 2 of those, he played with Tom Brady, and in another, he played with Peyton Manning. Now, Welker doesn't have as many Super Bowl losses as some other players. 3 players have actually lost 5 times. That is, offensive lineman Glenn Parker, linebacker Cornelius Bennett, and quarterback Gail Gilbert. However, these are inflated because they include the Bills' 4-peat of Super Bowl losses, so I'd consider that more so to be a part of the Bills' curse rather than the individual players. Welker's involves several teams over a long span of time. He just seems unlucky. He played with Tom Brady for 6 seasons as a go-to guy, but never won the Super Bowl with him. Instead, he lost twice during that period to the Giants, one of those being the record-breaking season that saw the undefeated 18-0 Patriots upset in the Super Bowl. He later left New England to go play with Peyton Manning and Denver, and immediately was a part of Peyton's historic regular season performance and the Broncos' historic beatdown by Seattle in the Super Bowl, making him 0-3 with 2 of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play. Now, what's ironic is that the following year, New England would win the Super Bowl against the Seahawks, so 2 years after Welker left New England for Denver. And what's also ironic is, after that year, which was Welker's 2nd with the Broncos, he would leave Denver for St. Louis. And the season immediately after he left, the Broncos won the Super Bowl. So despite being on so many championship contending teams, he was always on the right one at the wrong time. It does get worse for poor Wes. After he hung up his cleats, he took up coaching, including being the wide receiver coach for the 49ers during the 2019 season. Now that year, San Francisco made it to the Super Bowl, where they faced off against the Kansas City Chiefs and up-and-coming superstar Patrick Mahomes, who, like Brady, always finds himself mixed up in this stuff. The Chiefs, of course, won that game. But what you may not remember is that San Francisco had a 10-point lead going into the 4th quarter. Regardless, that makes Welker 0-4 in Super Bowls, despite being a part of some pretty stacked teams. Now thankfully, he has plenty of time to get a ring as a coach, although I wouldn't personally risk having him on my sideline. I think this is a tough one to break, but not impossible. Just go coach for the Chiefs. On November 4th, 2019, the Monday Night Football game between the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys was interrupted by someone running out onto the field. But this was not your usual streaker. Rather, it was a black cat that sent the game into a delay. The cat sprinted out onto the field with the agility of the attending Saquon Barkley, and the feline even reached the end zone, something the Cowboys had yet to do in that game. But it may have opened the path forward for them. Now, thankfully, before they could catch it and Peanut the Squirrelet, the cat did escape back into the stands, where it was never seen again, disappearing into the night. Just days after Halloween, this was something of an ironic and humorous event. However, it would quickly turn eerie. Black cats have of course long been associated with bad luck and witchcraft, but when you add football into the equation, you're damn right we're talking about a curse. The Giants were the ones to feel the immediate effects, as they had led Dallas 9-3 before the interruption, but went on to lose the game 37-18. They ended up having a pretty disastrous season as well, but it was the string of events that unfolded after the Monday night game that showed the true effects of the curse. It was not the Giants or even the Cowboys that would become jinxed, rather the cat teams were. The franchises with a cat as their name, so the Bengals, Jaguars, Panthers, and Lions would be the ones affected. Over the next few weeks, these four teams would go a combined 0-12. It would be the Bengals who lifted the curse when they defeated the New York Jets about a month after the incident. Since then, the curse seems to have been broken and exists mainly in memory. But if you're a fan of a putty tat team, you better hope that black cat never shows its whiskered face again. I mean, I guess you could argue all those cat teams just sucked that year, but I think there's something more at play here. Since it has been broken, but also proved its effect, I'll consider the black cat curse an easy one to break. The terrible towel curse is one with a lot more validity behind it than you might initially think. The curse is said to occur when an opposing team disrespects the Steelers' terrible towel, with this act essentially ending their own season. For example, last season, the Jacksonville Jaguars came to Pittsburgh and left with a win, a 6-2 record, and a curse. For in this game, the Jags celebrated a late interception by disrespecting the towel. After that game, Jacksonville would go 3-7, finishing with a 9-8 record, losing the division to the Texans and losing a wild card spot to none other than the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had previously been lifeless. And the Jags aren't really looking all that great this year either. Now, the terrible towel was created in 1975, the same year the Steelers won their first Super Bowl. So it does seem that not only does the towel curse those that disrespect it, but it also provides a blessing to the Steelers, often giving them a surge of good fortune. The curse has a pretty extensive history. It's claimed the likes of the Titans, as well as the Bengals a couple times, including in 2005, when the Steelers would go on to defeat the Bengals in the wild card and win the Super Bowl. The Chargers tested it in the 1994 AFC Championship, which was a win over the Steelers, only to promptly lose the Super Bowl and never make it back since. One of the more egregious examples is with the Arizona Cardinals right before their Super Bowl matchup against the Steelers in 2008. Now, this time it wasn't even the players that disrespected the towel, and the coach even warned against it. Instead, it was the mascot and the mayor of Phoenix that did so, as they were celebrating sending their team off to the Super Bowl, but in the process, they essentially sent them off to their own demise. I mean, how stupid do you have to be? The last thing Arizona needed was another curse. And I think we all know how that Super Bowl turned out for the Cardinals. This seems to be a very legitimate curse that people keep testing for some reason. It's not that hard to avoid, just don't stomp on the damn towel. Still though, this one looks quite powerful, and is unique in that it not only curses the opposing team, but seems to empower the Steelers as well. It is a top tier curse, as once you're afflicted, you're pretty much screwed. Another curse that ended up benefiting the Steelers is that of Bobby Layne. perhaps the most infamous curse in NFL history. Our story begins back in the 1950s, a time where the Detroit Lions were a powerhouse in the NFL, led by future Hall of Fame quarterback Bobby Layne. The Lions won 3 NFL championships in 1952, 1953, and 1957. Following the 57 run though, the defending champs traded away their star quarterback after the second game of the season. Layne would now be suiting up for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and although he didn't see much postseason success during his time in the Steel City, he apparently made sure his old team wouldn't either. The story goes that after being traded, Layne stated that the Lions would not win for 50 years, although there's debate about whether he actually said this or not. But even if that part is just an urban legend, its supposed effect seems eerily real. Despite being a force to be reckoned with in the 1950s, the Lions have not made it back to another NFL championship or Super Bowl since that 1957 win. In fact, during that span, they only managed to win 3 playoff games, and 2 of those came last year, when they did finally reach the NFC Championship. This included a record 9 straight playoff losses, and as of this video, they are the only NFC team to never reach the Super Bowl. Now, on the flip side of that, in the decades since acquiring Layne in the trade, the Steelers have won 6 Super Bowls, with one of those victories actually being played in Detroit. So that means, in this span, the Steelers have twice as many Super Bowl wins as the Lions do playoff wins. But it gets even stranger. As allegedly stated by Layne, the curse was meant to last 50 years, and so the last year of the curse would be in 2008, and it would go out with a bang. In 2008, the Lions went winless, the infamous 0-16 season, the first team to do so. That same year, in 2008, the Steelers won their 6th Super Bowl, the first team to do so. At that time, there could not have been more of a contrast between the two franchises. Now, since the year the curse expired, things have evened out a bit. The Steelers have not won another Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the Lions seem better than ever, coming off their best season in a very long time, again winning 2 playoff games, more than doubling the amount they had in the past 65 years. As of this video, they are currently perhaps the best team in the NFL. This is an example of a curse coming full circle. It was never broken, it just completed its set time, 50 years. The Lions certainly did not win in that half a century. Good news for Lions fans is that your team's curse was lifted 16 years ago, and you can begin to enjoy watching your team on Sundays. All you had to do was wait 5 decades for the curse to run its course. Since this curse is no longer active, I feel that I can't quite put it in the top tier, but out of respect for what it accomplished, I will put it in the hard to break tier. One of the more obscure potential curses I came across is the theory that Marcus Allen placed a hex on Raiders owner Al Davis. This one's a bit creepy, but may have some legitimacy to it. Now, despite being a tremendous player for the Raiders, Al Davis famously did not like Marcus Allen for some reason. That's not entirely clear. But Allen was a huge part of the Raiders' success, which not only included Hall of Fame production, but a Super Bowl MVP, and NFL MVP. Regardless of how well Allen ran for the Raiders ran Allen out of Oakland after several seasons of fighting with owner Al Davis, including Allen being benched and at one point 4th on the depth chart. He would go on to play 5 more years with Kansas City before retiring and later going into the Hall of Fame as a Chief. The bad blood between Davis and Allen did not end up defining either one, but it may have been even darker than you might think. There is a claim that I can't verify that Marcus Allen kept a photo of Al Davis in his freezer following his departure from the team in an attempt to place some sort of hex on the Raiders owner. I guess to sort of freeze his success or something. Well, regardless of it's true or not, the Raiders have not won a Super Bowl since 1983, when Marcus Allen was Super Bowl MVP, although they did make it back in 2002, where they lost to the coach they had just traded away. And this was a franchise that had won 3 Super Bowls in 8 years. Now, while it is an interesting little piece of NFL lore, I don't put too much stock into it. For one, Al Davis passed away in 2011, so I would assume the curse would have been lifted at that point, as it was a curse placed directly on him, not the Raiders. Also, if there was a picture of Davis in Allen's freezer, I can't imagine it's still there. At least I'd hope not. I think this is one of those where the Raiders' lack of postseason success is better explained by mismanagement rather than a curse. So at this point, I'm gonna say it's not a real curse. Broadway Joe, legendary Jets quarterback Joe Namath, is at the center of a curse that has become a classic. Your average football fan may not know a whole lot about the early Super Bowls, but if I had to guess if there was one that most are at least familiar with, it's Super Bowl III. So the early Super Bowl era saw the NFL champion face off against the AFL champion, who at this time were still separate leagues, being a few years out from the merger. The NFL, though, was the more prestigious league, and the first two Super Bowls were blowout wins for the NFL champion Green Bay Packers. As such, many in the football world, the NFL, and the media were writing the Jets off when they earned the right to represent the AFL in the Super Bowl against the NFL's Baltimore Colts, who were being touted as one of the greatest teams of all time. With Falcons head coach Norm Van Brocklin saying this will be Joe Namath's first professional game, nobody was giving the New York Jets a chance in hell, and in some cases were flat out disrespecting them and their league. However, Joe Namath was just what the Jets and the AFL needed, a cocky, talented star quarterback out of Alabama who was not afraid of the spotlight. Rather, he sought it out. In response to all the negativity, Broadway Joe famously declared, "We're going to win the game, I guarantee it." And Namath didn't lie, as the Jets made easy work of the Colts, bringing legitimacy to the AFL and the Lombardi back to New York. Joe Namath's guarantee is one of the most legendary moments in NFL history. However, it does have a lesser known dark side. For some say that when Namath guaranteed that victory, he actually sold his soul, or more likely, the Jets' soul, in exchange for that win. Following the 1969 Super Bowl, the Jets have not returned to the big game, never once making it past the AFC Championship in the 55 years since. Instead, the Jets have mostly been a mediocre franchise in the decades following that iconic moment. They just seem to be a very unlucky team. I mean, just look at last year when they finally got a star quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, just for him to tear his Achilles on the opening drive. Now that he's back, they still struggle to win. Things just don't seem to work out for the Jets. I've seen some speculate that the curse will die with Namath, but I'm not sure that's the case. Although he was the one who made the deal, it seems more plausible that it was the Jets' soul that was claimed, and the devil always gets his due. The Joe Namath guarantee is a curse that appears to be very strong, and doesn't have a clear solution to breaking it. I'm sorry, Jets fans. I don't think God hates you, but the devil does own your team. Let's stay in New York and visit the rival Giants for our next curse. Yes, the infamous boat photo. You've probably seen it, it's been a meme for years now, and still pops up from time to time, despite the picture being taken in 2017. So here's the story. It was Wild Card Week, with the Giants slated to face the Packers in Green Bay. Now you'd probably think the Giants would spend the week relentlessly preparing for the matchup, and for the most part, I think they did, except for one infamous moment. Once this picture made the rounds on the internet, the Giants were heavily criticized, as it showed basically their entire wide receiver room partying on a yacht in Miami. The photo included the likes of Odell Beckham Jr., Sterling Shepard, Victor Cruz, and Roger Lewis. Now the players and team were widely mocked for this, but what made this incident into something even more was when New York got dick-slapped by Green Bay 38-13, leading to speculation that they were not prepared for the game. However, the boat photo might have had even more of a lasting effect, as the 5 seasons afterwards would all be losing ones. Now you might say they broke the curse in 2022, when they beat the Vikings in the playoffs that year, but I'd argue that the Vikings just out-cursed them. And also that win seems to have given them more confidence to pay Daniel Jones a massive contract. So did they really win? In any case, the Giants are currently considered one of the worst teams in the NFL. NFL. The boat photo might be more symbolic of the state of the Giants more than an actual curse, but it's hard to deny its legacy since they haven't quite been right since. I'm going to put it as an easy one to break. Here's another obscure one that I imagine only Patriots fans are familiar with. It's the curse of number 17. This one's simple. Anyone who wears 17 is destined to underperform or worse. I found this handy chart from Pro Football Reference that shows all the players to ever wear 17, at least the ones worth keeping records of. And wow, it is bad. Of all the players listed here, the best would have to be the first one, Mike Taliaferro, who did at least have one Pro Bowl season playing quarterback for the team. Other than that, it's really rough. You have some punters that look like they have been decent, including their current one, a lot of backup quarterbacks, and a lot of wide receivers, including second-round bust Chad Jackson. When you're talking about Aaron Dobson being the most impactful, you know it's bad. Of course, there is Antonio Brown there, because remember he did play for the Patriots for that one game, and then had all of his allegations and whatnot, so that was it for him in New England. It's actually a bit shocking how unproductive this number is. It might just be that no good players ever choose it for some reason, but I'll put it as an easier one to break. A decent player is all it would take. The curse of Billy Penn, or the William Penn curse, is one Philly sports fans will be familiar with. This one is more of a curse on an entire city rather than a team, but it does directly involve the Eagles, so we'll mention it. Okay, so let's go back to 1987. There was something of a gentleman's agreement that no building in Philadelphia could exceed the height of the William Penn statue atop City Hall. However, when the One Liberty Place skyscraper was built in '87, it broke that agreement and angered the spirit of the legendary William Penn. Previously, the city of Philadelphia had enjoyed some recent success with their sports teams in the 70s and early 80s, including the Flyers winning 2 Stanley Cups, the Phillies winning the World Series, the 76ers winning the finals, and the Eagles at least making a Super Bowl. In fact, all of the teams seemed to be pretty competitive. But all that changed in 1987. Following the construction of One Liberty Place, a curse was One Liberty placed on the city of Philadelphia. A title drought would affect all of Philly's major sports teams. They were able to make it to the playoffs and even the championship games, but always fell short in the end. Fast forward to 2007, the last championship won by a Philly team was in 1983. However, with the construction of the Comcast Center, the newest building, they had an opportunity to lift the curse, and workers would place a small figurine of William Penn at the top of the skyscraper, making him stand above the rest of Philly once again. And this seemed to work. In fact, the spirit of the Quaker was so appreciative of the gesture, he allowed the Phillies to win the World Series the next year, in 2008. In 2017, when an even taller building was built, they once again put a William Penn figurine atop it. And once again, they were blessed with a championship the following year, in the form of the Eagles winning their first Super Bowl. This is a bit like the Eagles' PA counterpart, Steelers' Terrible Towel, as both seem to get good fortune from it at times, although Phillies can hurt them if they don't follow William Penn's wishes. I think this is a very real curse, and I'm glad to see the city of Philadelphia not frick around with it and just do the right thing. I think as long as William Penn stands above Philly, the Eagles and the rest of the Philly teams have nothing to worry about, and may even see some good fortune from it, especially when they construct an even taller skyscraper for Penn to stand even higher. So I think, as of now, it's an easy one to break. Just keep that statuette up there. I guess I should also mention the Cleveland sports curse, so that Browns fans don't feel left out. Unlike the Billy Penn curse, this one doesn't have a clear origin or solution, but for a long time, many felt that the city of Cleveland was cursed. From 1964 to 2016, all 3 sports teams, the Browns, the Cavaliers, and the Indians, all failed to win a championship. That's a 52-year drought, although the curse was broken when the Cavaliers won the NBA championship in 2016. The Indians, now called the Guardians, also made it to the World Series in 2016, but they did come up short. However, it's the Browns that really seem to bear the brunt of the curse. You already know the Browns are bad, but they weren't always bad. In fact, once upon a time, they were dominant. They were originally a part of the AAFC, a rival league to the NFL that was quite formidable. In this league, the Browns won 4 championships in the late 1940s. Upon joining the NFL, they won 4 NFL championships, 3 in the 50s, and 1 in 1964, the final championship before the Cleveland curse took effect. After that though, the Browns were pretty mediocre in the 70s and 80s during the supposed curse, and in 1995, owner Art Modell decided to move his team to Baltimore. It ended up being agreed that while Modell would take all of his personnel with him, including players and coaches, the Browns' name, colors, history, etc. would remain behind in Cleveland to later be revived as a new team. And thus the Baltimore Ravens were born. So yes, the Ravens are basically the Browns, just relocated and with a name change. However, the Ravens were quickly successful as they won the Super Bowl in 2000 and later in 2012. So if you consider them the original Browns franchise, then you can see how they've had their eras of success over the decades. However, it's the modern day Cleveland Browns that claim the original Browns history, even if they are kind of a separate thing. And ever since the franchise was brought back in 1999, they have been the worst team in the NFL. But you have to remember that this was essentially a brand new franchise, just with the old aesthetic. While the Ravens were technically the expansion team, in reality the Browns were, as the Ravens were just more so a relocated team. The new Browns have been marred with poor management, poor coaching, and poor quarterback play since they were reinstated. As far as a Cleveland sports curse goes, the city seems to have lifted it already, and as far as a Browns curse goes, I think they might just be bad, which may be a curse itself, but at least there's no outside force against you. You just gotta get good. The Browns have become much more competitive over the last few years. I don't know when or if they'll win a Super Bowl, but I think their worst days are behind them. So no, I don't think this is a real curse. And that's going to do it for part 2. I will have a third and final episode coming out, hopefully sooner than this one, that will cover any remaining curses. I hope you enjoyed this installment, and I'll see you in the next one.